Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. Welcome to this episode. In this episode, I will be sharing some of my own contemplations about the energy of the week that's ahead of us, as well as the astrology. These are really kind of co-created with my guides, with my sacred ancestors, with the cosmic body. And so my invitation for you, as always, is to listen with discernment and to allow yourself to participate actively as you're listening to this, right? Notice what insights are coming up for you within your own intuitive body, within your own mental body, within your own emotional body, right? And trust that that's really the information you're supposed to receive, even if maybe that's not part of what I'm saying. And if anything that I'm saying doesn't really vibe with you, trust yourself. All right, so as always, let's begin with a little bit of an overview of the astrology of the week ahead. On Monday, January 9th, we have Venus in Aquarius creating a trine with Mars, which is currently retrograde in Gemini. And then on Wednesday, January 11th, Venus is going to be squaring the nodal axis, which is in Taurus Scorpio. And the asteroid Juno will be entering Aries. On Thursday, January 12th, we have a pretty significant event, which is Mars is going to be stationing direct after it's been retrograde for a little bit over 2 months. And on Friday, January 13th, Mercury, which is currently retrograding in the sign of Capricorn, will be creating a trine with the North Node, right? Whereas the Sun in Capricorn will be sextiling Neptune in Pisces. And then on Saturday, January 14th, Venus in Aquarius is going to be squaring Uranus in Taurus, right? As you probably know, if you have been following the astrology, Uranus has been pretty close to the North Node, right? And so Venus is going to be creating a square to both the nodal axis as well as Uranus. So this astrology is very interesting, and I would like to take this time to really kind of give. First of all, I'm going to really focus on just one piece of the astrology, while also kind of keeping in mind the larger stage that's set here, right? The larger energetic, let's say, traffic that's been going on with the rest of the other planets, right? So what I'm going to be really focusing on is this experience of Mars stationing direct. And, while also keeping in mind that Venus is going to be, square the nodal axis as well as square Taurus, right? But Venus will be trining Mars. So I think what's interesting specifically to really kind of sit down with, and this is part of my own contemplation for this week, is really around meditating on the larger overarching view of what Mars has been doing in the sign of Gemini. Because Mars entered Gemini on August 20th, 2022, right? These are all dates for the US, by the way. And then Mars turned retrograde on Gemini, 25th degree of Gemini, on October 30th, right? And it retrograded back all the way to 8th degree of Gemini. And then this week, right, on Thursday, it will station direct. And it will be continuing to move in a direct motion until it leaves Gemini and enter Cancer on March 25th. So essentially, right, if we start to take a larger view, kind of a bigger picture perspective of Mars's movement, it's essentially spent a couple months going direct, and then a little over 2 months going retrograde, and then we are entering the next phase, which is Mars for a little over 2 months going direct in Gemini. In total, Mars will be spending over 7 months in Gemini across 2022 and 2023, right? Which is really significant because usually Mars moves pretty quickly. And I would say Mars maybe spends about a month in each sign. And so this really long stay in Gemini is really profound, right? And probably there has been some sort of direct transformation that we experience from living through this transit. I also like to think of planets kind of experiencing retrograde motions, right, or some sort of retrogradation as having 3 acts usually. Not all planets, some of the slower moving planets actually have more than 3 acts, but this particular Mars and Gemini situation has 3 acts, right? The first one, going direct or entering Gemini and then going direct and then going retrograde, right? And then the third act is what we are currently going to be moving into, which is Mars going direct in Gemini, right? Again. So symbolically, or maybe even poetically, you can consider these 3 acts however you would like. But one way that I like to look at it is to consider 3 acts of a play or maybe an opera, right? In the first act, we are introduced to the characters, we're introduced to the settings, the landscapes that we kind of find our characters in. And then the second act is when things tend to get really messy, maybe conflicts occur, maybe there's a little bit of a confusion or frustration, things heated up a little bit. There's kind of a heightening or a thickening of the plot with a little bit of like a crescendo. And then during the third act, it's often where we reach towards some kind of resolution, right? And resolutions are not only happy endings or bad endings, right? No resolution is also a valid resolution. As you know, if you like to watch movies or TV shows or whatever, sometimes you end with a cliffhanger, right? So the type of resolutions that we are seeing can be as diverse and all of the different ways that this resolution can show up is really valid, right? It's as diverse as the conflicts that precede the resolution. So sometimes resolution means you reach some sort of happy ending, some sort of growth. Other times a resolution is a cutting off, a separation, whether, tragic or a separation that feels like a relief, or, some other time, especially I think in real life, it's simply the ending of one cycle of experience, right? You learn your lesson, you move on, and then there's some kind of maybe bittersweet quality when you look back on that. Or maybe you are really done with the kind of lesson, the kind of experience that this particular transit has been offering you, right? Regardless of how you feel about it, I think entering the third act from the second act of kind of the thickening of the plot, right, of the part of like confusion, the part of just kind of like things getting really stirred up in the pot, right, is a moment of transition. We're really at this moment, as we are exiting Act 2 and entering Act 3, we are really kind of transitioning, right? We're entering a liminal period where there's something kind of precarious about this transition, right? Another example that I like to think of when I'm thinking about this kind of 3-part act of planets going direct and then retrograde and then back direct is the sonata form. So if you study classical music or you listen to classical music, you might be aware that there's something called the sonata form, where in the exposition, a particular theme is introduced, and then during the development, that theme is kind of played around with, tossed around, right, in the salad mix of kind of almost like there's almost like an improvisatory quality to this development, and then eventually you go to the third act, which is what is called the recapitulation, right, which is essentially a mirroring of the exposition, but there's like a slightly different quality of how the theme is now introduced and treated. So similarly, I think as we wind down from more of the development side of this theme, right, as we are entering into the recapitulation, there's something precarious about this moment. You know, when planets end their retrograde period and begin to station direct, you can notice, if you pay attention to the actual speed of the planet from the perspective of Earth, that is moving very, very slowly, right? Again, an aside on the technical level, retrogrades don't mean that planets really move backwards, right? The term retrograde may kind of suggest that, but the truth is that these planets are really in a part of their orbit which creates an appearance of moving backwards, because in that moment, it's moving at a pace that's a little slower than the Earth around the sun, right? Which is kind of interesting to consider as well on a poetic level, because it's really more our human experience that feels slow rather than the planet or the planetary force itself being slow, right? And sometimes, you know, especially with Mars retrograde, it may not feel slow necessarily. It may simply feel messy or complicated or confusing, right? Or maybe actually even nice, you know, because if the Mars direct experience has been really intense for you, you get a little bit of a break, right? So in any case, as planets are ending their retrograde period, beginning to station direct, the slow movement, I think, is really interesting to contemplate, right? Even though Mars technically isn't really retrograde anymore by the middle of the week, this slowing down has been happening as it's ending the retrograde period and as it's entering the direct period, right? And so the pace, I feel, doesn't really pick up right away. In addition, Mars in Gemini is also ruled by Mercury, which is currently in Capricorn, and Mercury is also retrograde until January 18th. So this feeling of like maybe slowness or fogginess or thickness that you may feel kind of maybe on a personal level may really still be present on some level. To me, Mars in Gemini has kind of been presenting a story around noticing the seeds of our personal desires, right? And then exploring in kind of noticing or discovering these seeds of desires, how we relate to our desires on a more general level, right? Something to note about Mars is that Mars is a personal planet. So I think it's probably pretty safe to say that this process of Mars going into Gemini, staying in Gemini for 7 months, you know, first going direct and then retrograde and then direct again, hasn't really brought up so much about, you know, themes that are in the collective desires. But, you know, what I'm really talking about here is like themes around like world peace or like greater human consciousness has maybe not been so present on like the world stage, but my sense is that this transit has been really focused around personal ambitions, around our ability to verbalize and conceptualize our personal ambitions, and also our access or our perception of our access to kind of spreading our ambition, right? To allowing our ambition to kind of take flight in the way that it wants to. Gemini is a mutable air sign ruled by Mercury. So Gemini has to do with the idea of dispersion, right? Of cross-pollination. Gemini relates to a certain diversity of experiences and perspectives, right? So Mars in Gemini may really have brought forth a lot of different experiences around our desires, right? How we communicate them with ourselves and how we treat our desires in general. Particularly if Gemini plays a prominent role in your chart, that is, if you are a Gemini rising, if you are a mutable rising, right? Pisces, Sagittarius, or Virgo rising, or if your midheaven or your IC is in Gemini, or if your sun or your moon is in Gemini natally, then you may find that this transit was probably pretty loud in your life. You may really be seeing kind of the ways that you either deny or run away from your own desires, or you may see that on the other hand, maybe you are too attached, right, to the point of being frozen, or you're too invested in a particular outcome and you're fighting too hard in order to really actually, in a way that kind of stops you from really getting to I resist saying the word productive, but that's kind of the vibe that I'm going for, right? That it's beyond productive for you to be so invested, right, in your desires. For me specifically, Mars in Gemini, particularly during the retrograde period, has kind of taught me the different ways and the different perspectives that I could begin coming into right relationship with my desires, right? In the words of one of my astrology teachers, Diana Rose Harper, like right-sizing my relationship with my desires, right? More importantly, perhaps, to really understand our relationship with our desires and the ways that that relationship is as mutable, as alive, as ever-changing as the desires themselves, right? The experience of this Mars in Gemini going retrograde can feel like, as we inch closer towards or kind of move away from certain desires, we can see that our relationship with desires is not static, right? That we have to be constantly in dialogue with our desires. We have to constantly kind of be checking in with, is this still what I want, right? How has, getting a little further on the path of working with this desire, how has that changed my relationship or my understanding of that desire? On the one hand, this experience can feel really exhausting and really daunting, right? It almost feels like chasing a moving target. A part of us can feel, really exhausted and tired by this, and we just want to fulfill a particular desire, right? Maybe we just want to find the person who can understand us and who can be in a relationship with us. Or maybe we just want to find the right job for ourselves, right? I think one way to, really contemplate the idea of right-sizing our relationship with our desires, right, is remembering that our desires are also a sign that we are still alive. That having certain desires and having those desires change and having our relationship to those desires changing remind us that we are alive. To be alive is to be a being that have desires, right? And to be alive also means that we are moving around, that we are changing by the minute. And so I think that so one thing I want to talk about is the idea of the life force, right? And this is something that is talked about a lot or considered a lot in a lot of energetic wisdom traditions. So one of my energy cultivation teachers, Deborah Cremens, talks about our life force as that force, right, which kind of serves as the unique frequency that signals our aliveness in this universe, or that's kind of how I understand it from her teaching. And Deborah's teacher, Francesca McCartney, describes the life force energy as such in her book, Body of Health. And I'm going to link all of these people in the show notes in case you are interested in checking out their work. So Francesca defined the vital life force as a coherent, patterned, and essential vivifying energy generated with your first breath at birth and extinguished with your last dying breath. It is the sustenance of life and the pulse of health. So the way that I understand our life force energy is I like to kind of draw a parallel between our life force energy with our actual physical voice, right? Something that I think is always so trippy to consider is the fact that our voices are unique in this universe. Like literally, you're listening to my voice right now and nobody else in the universe has my voice. I mean, let that sink in for a second, right? How wild is that? That literally your voice is a unique instrument in this universe. Nobody else sounds like you. Similarly, I think we can consider our life force as the energetic imprint, the vibrational frequency that's unique to us, right? It's the frequency that only our unique combination of physical body and our spirit can generate in this universe. It's really the thing that distinguishes, that separates us on the tangible plane from the rest of the world, from the rest of the universe, right? The life force energy is that which allows you to not physically and energetically totally merge with your chair, with your computer, with your pet, with your lover, right? It gives you the ability, or it's kind of a compendium of an energetic signature that, signals you as a unique being in this universe. And so, okay, let's go back to astrology, right? One way that I've heard the planetary force, the planetary archetype of Mars being described is that Mars relates to our life force energy, right? And I think when we look at natal charts or our birth charts, our Mars placement can certainly reflect the quality and the texture of our personal life force and also our access to it, right? In other words, how able are we to see our life force within ourselves, within others, and how much access do we have to harness our life force to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish in this lifetime, right? To direct that life force to yield tangible results. And so, to me, this is true. And also, I feel like Mars carries kind of a specific expression of that life force energy, right? It's not just general life force energy. To me, Mars is a very specific, shall we say, genre, right? Or very specific paint color of this life force energy. In the kind of pure, unfiltered essence of Mars, it has to do with kind of this raw electric expression of that life force, right? It's specifically and by definition very potent. It's not just the life force that sustains your aliveness, it's the life force that kind of wants to burst through your vein, right? It's the life force that's a little extra, that's a little forceful, that's a little feral, that's a little wild, right? Mars is the expression of our life force that our ancestors really tapped into when they were hunting, an alive animal, right? To feed their tribe or their village. It's that feeling of like being hungry and wanting to quench that hunger. It's the expression of one's life force that, the ancient warriors kind of tap into in order to protect themselves when their city is under attack, right? Mars is not necessarily pretty. Mars can be rash in its unfiltered essence. It can be penetrating. It can be piercing, right? And so for a lot of us, the process of cultivating a conscious relationship with this particular strand of our life force energy, right? The Martian version of our life force energy, or the Martian genre of our life force energy, is a process that requires a level of awareness, but also compassion, patience, and time, right? So by the definition that Francesca McCartney put in her book about the vital life force, right, that it's kind of the sustenance of life and the pulse of health, our life force energy moves through us and expresses itself through us as long as we are alive, regardless of how willing we are to participate and to direct it with intention, right? Sometimes we can feel like we are in denial of that really potent version of our life force energy. And other times we feel like we can't get enough of it, right? And we feel like we need to direct it specifically so that we can reach a certain outcome. It's kind of like my way or the highway, right? I think an example of, the way that our potent life force can move through us, and, how we, how there's variations in how we deal with it and how we kind of channel it is, think about the contrast between an angsty teenager boy, right? With really strong willpower and a growing muscle power, but maybe not a lot of refinement, versus like a martial arts teacher who has been practicing their craft of directing their mind, directing their energy, and expressing it in their movement for decades, right? There's a huge difference in how one is not only able to access that kind of raw quality of the life force, but also harness it and shape it into something that can be really beautiful, right? Really elegant, really life-giving. There's a contrast between, allowing ourselves to kind of move with brute force, right? Through kind of being in maybe an emergency kind of headspace, through, lack of filter emotionally, or whether we are patient enough to direct that really potent energy through focus and through the cultivation of wisdom, right? So this is a super long-winded of me trying to share a picture, right, a description of the Mars energy and around how in this process of Mars going from having been retrograde for a while into going direct, how that can feel in our body, right? So if you have been listening to my weekly contemplations, you may know that last week I was sharing a little bit about how it feels important to turn one's attention inwards into our own lives, into really making space, allowing our focus to be directed towards honest reflections rather than exercising willpower, right, on a conscious level. I think the energy for this week, and as Mars is beginning to station direct, but still moving very slowly and still ruled by Mercury that is currently going retrograde until January 18th, right? The energy is a little different. The difference is subtle, but I think it's quite significant. So if last week, I would kind of, the energy last week to me feels like there's a mental push to act, but maybe there's not really a lot of willpower that's available within our own system, or there's not a lot of willpower that's available in the collective for us to tap into to make, to turn desire into action, right? This week, and probably a little into like next week, it feels to me more like there's an energetic or maybe even like a somatic push to act. Like there's this part of us that is feeling like we need to do something about this, but there's not yet a lot of clarity around how to direct the potency of that energy into a constructive space, right? So if you have been feeling some desires burning in your heart, especially if this desire was kind of cooked up, right? If it emerged during the Mars retrograde period since late October, but perhaps if you are feeling still a little bit of a gap between this desire and your ability to realize the desire or to communicate the desires, then my recommendation here is to metaphorically kind of sharpen your blades during this week, right? Don't necessarily make any rash actions. Don't feel like you have to jump the gun, and rather notice what happens, or notice what comes up for you as you exercise caution, right? To be cautious is to be alert. And to be alert is to pay attention, right? And in order to really pay attention, one needs to kind of hold a certain capacity to feel this surging life force energy, and to be patient enough to not necessarily direct it towards action before you know that it's the right opportunity, right? In other words, it's important to kind of investigate and contemplate our relationship to titrating the growing life force that's probably beginning to bubble up for us, right? I want to acknowledge that this energy for some people can feel super frustrating. And I want to validate that that's true. Like, yes, you are right. This is very frustrating. I want you to give yourself full permission to truly feel your feelings. You know, whether that's frustration or maybe even relief, right? Maybe you're like, oh, finally, Mars is going direct. You know, this Mars retrograde has been really tough on me. This may be a really great time for you to direct that life force energy into conversations. Actually, that's kind of what I'm really feeling with Mars going direct in Gemini. That it's much more potent to be, pollinating the seeds of your desires by talking about it. Like, there are times when talking about one's desires and one's plans may actually kind of take away from the potency of the energy that you could have been spending or directing into actually doing the thing, right? But my sense is for this week, that's not really the case. In fact, there's something that might be really generative from, having a conversation with a trusted friend who's maybe, in the past, their wise counsel and maybe their expansive view has helped you move away from a sense of urgency that may be rising for you, right? It may be really helpful to have conversations with these kinds of people. If you're noticing, certain patterns around impulsiveness coming up, right? Or a feeling like, if I don't do anything now, this is not going to ever work out, right? That to me is kind of a really good alarm to be aware of, because it may be really powerful for you to work with that energy either in a really physical way, physical exercise that is within your capacity, whatever that looks like, can be really amazing for this week. Or you may also want to get an energetic tune-up, and how that looks like can be a few different things, right? I have a couple of recommendations here. One is that I will be dropping a free audio meditation that I'm sharing with my community to help you with grounding. It's really coming from a course that I've been beta testing, and I might or might not release them. Spoiler alert. But I feel like it can really help you, right, this week, especially if you have been thinking about kind of engaging with an energetic or a meditation practice. It's not a very long meditation. It's about 12 minutes. So I recommend that you check that out. I'm going to be sharing the link to that in the show notes below. And I also, if you are interested in maybe, if what's coming up for you feels really big and really intense, and that you perhaps need a little bit more space holding or really kind of masterful, skillful guiding or guidance or kind of space holding, I would really recommend the work of Natasha Levinger. Actually, Natasha is a dear friend of mine. She's an energy healer, she's an intuitive coach, and her work is often focused on kind of healing the inner child part of us or working and communicating with that part of us. Recently, I finished a 3-month mentorship container with Natasha called Awakening. And honestly, it's been really amazing. It's been super incredible to get her support around certain relational patterns, both with others and also in terms of how I talk to myself and relate to myself. And over a longer period of time, it's been really transformative for me personally. So I know that Natasha has a lot of incredible resources on her site, and I think she also does one-on-one readings. So I will leave all of the links in the show notes below. And you can reach out to her if that calls to you. I think, in fact, I know for sure that I have a conversation with Natasha on this podcast. And it is episode 6. Yes. So episode 6 of Healing the Spirit, aka this podcast you're listening to, is entitled Empowering Ourselves Through Energy Healing, and Natasha was my guest. So maybe you might want to check out that episode and feel into if there's a resonance there, and maybe Natasha can help you a little bit with whatever is coming up. So my final note here for you for contemplation, for you to really be feeling into for this coming week, is a card pull that I did. And again, there is a picture of this somewhere in the show notes in the link that you can find. But I pulled the 5 of Cups from the Desert Illuminations Tarot, which I have been enjoying getting to know as of late. And the card that I pulled for this week was the 5 of Cups. And if you have a relationship with tarot, notice what's coming up for you as you are hearing that I pulled the 5 of Cups. And the message that I was receiving as I was pulling this card was to really not give up on the thing that you're doing. 5 is a really interesting number. It is about the halfway point, right? And the cup suit often to me speaks to how we feel on an emotional level, where we're at, who we are in this moment. And so this card is about getting real around our capacity, right? And often getting real with our capacity doesn't necessarily mean giving up. Rather, it is about giving ourselves the permission to ask for help. Where can you ask for help? Where are you no longer able to do it alone? And where are you focusing on all the things that are not working versus spending your energy giving yourself a little bit of extra mental space from yourself, between yourself and the thing that you are trying to make happen? And, kind of giving yourself permission to feel into some creative solutions around what can still work or what has the potential to be turned into something else, right? There's an invitation, I feel, with this card to get really creative and to be truly resourceful, right? Meanwhile, also really validating that part of you that feels some type of way around, a perceived failure or a perceived slowness of something, some type of change or transformation that you are hoping for. Okay, so this episode, I've talked quite a lot about Mars, about the life force, and to end, I would like to just simply conclude, right, everything that I've been saying. I feel like this week is really about contemplating what are the ways that we can begin maybe acting on our desires or honoring our desires, but in a way that doesn't necessarily go directly into the most pointed, the most forceful way that we can assert our desire, but rather to have, add a little bit of levity, right? Add a little bit of space to that spreading, to that pollination of our desires. Where are we being invited to maybe allow our desires to grow through conversations with people and seeing where those conversations lead us, right? Or maybe through working with an internal pattern that has kept us stuck from truly acting on our desires. That is much more recommended, right? And much more interesting as a point of contemplation around where am I believing that I have to make a move when actually deep inside I know that this is not quite the time yet to be making the move, rather than, kind of following an impulse that feels wild and perhaps will lead to a certain level of like disappointment, yeah. So, okay, that is everything that I will share with regards to this coming week. I hope you have a fabulous week. If you have been enjoying this contemplation, I would truly appreciate if you could leave a review. I know for sure that Apple Podcasts have a feature where you can leave reviews and you can leave a rating. So I would love to receive a 5-star rating if you are enjoying this podcast, which most likely you are, because if you have listened all the way to the end here, you're probably enjoying it. And if you would like to leave a review, that would be super appreciated. I have been telling folks that literally 2 to 3 sentences, like a simple review, is sufficient, right? And it's super helpful in, assisting other people to find a podcast and to, maybe benefit from some of this work that I'm sharing as well. So I wish you a beautiful, beautiful week. And if patience feels difficult, I hope you find some sort of way to ease yourself into the directness that is starting to become available for us all this week. And yeah, I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening.